Good morning. I know it's early, but never too early to welcome all of you and our very special guest, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam. We are also video recording this event, and we're going to stream it on our website later today. Now, while you're finishing your breakfast, I want to tell you just a little bit about Governor Haslam and the success that Tennessee has had using evidence-based policy to strengthen the state's economy while keeping the budget balanced and building a healthy rainy day fund. First, a little background on Governor Bill Haslam. In 2003, he was elected mayor of Knoxville. He was re-elected in 2007. In 2010, he was elected the 49th governor of Tennessee, and 4 years later, re-elected again. Governor Haslam has been a leader in investing in education. He's made Tennessee the first state to offer all adults 2 years of tuition-free community or technical college. His Drive to 55 program has nothing to do with the speed limit, everything to do with higher education. He has set a goal to increase the number of Tennesseans with a post-secondary degree or credential to 55% by 2025. And he's done all of this while focusing on increasing innovation and building private sector jobs. Now here at Pew, we've had a substantial portfolio of state policy work for 2 decades that's helped states advance evidence-based policy on everything from election administration to criminal justice to dealing with the opioid crisis. A critical part of these efforts has been partnering with states. One of those collaborations was with Governor Haslam and his team, along with 5 other states, and that was focused on tax incentives. The initiative helped those states get a better return on their economic development investments by identifying and sharing best practices for collecting, managing, and analyzing the data that they need to administer those tax incentives and to evaluate their effectiveness. Now, no matter what state policy issue Pew works on, one of our goals is to draw attention to data-driven states like Tennessee that fund programs with measurable results. They get a high return on investment, and they are careful stewards of the taxpayer dollars and the state's long-term fiscal health. So I mentioned Governor Haslam's education initiatives and the evidence-based fiscal policies, but there's more to the story. He's also funding a safe and reliable transportation network. He's fighting the opioid crisis by focusing on prevention and treatment as well as law enforcement. Pew has had the privilege of providing technical assistance to the governor and state leaders as they work to reform the juvenile justice system. Because as the governor noted in his 2018 State of the State's address, we know from evidence that costly out-of-home placements are not good for children, communities, or taxpayers. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us here at Pew and all of you who joined us to hear more about how Governor Haslam is providing efficient and effective government for the state of Tennessee. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Governor Bill Haslam.
Oh, that was very nice. I ought to just say I'm Bill Haslam. I approve that message. You all have a good morning. Hey, here's what I'd like to do. I would love to turn this into a conversation, and I'm going to talk fairly quickly, and then we can talk about whatever you'd like. But first, I do want to thank Pew. Sue mentioned a couple of things that you all have helped us with. Back early in my administration, you helped us around the whole idea of what are the proper incentives as we work toward economic development. There's a lot of conversation today. Well, this is just, one state buying jobs from another state, and there's nothing productive in that. And by the way, is there any way to measure whether this ends up being a net benefit for the citizens or not? And Pew gave us some initial help there. Now we're looking, Pew's helping us look at the whole issue of juvenile justice. There's way too many people at too young of an age have their path determined for them for a long time due to a poor decision they made somewhere. And we currently have a bill in front of the legislature that is the result of work that Pew did, and then they did that in conjunction with several of our legislative leadership members, and it's making a huge difference. So for those of you who work for Pew, then you wonder, like, well, does anybody ever hear this stuff or use this stuff that we're working on? The answer is yes. And we, being in state or local government is the ultimate in pragmatic politics. The whole, Mayor LaGuardia thing of there's not such thing as a Democrat or Republican pothole. It's the same thing with a lot of the folks that we serve. And so what you are doing is huge help. And one of the things you learn as a governor when you get near the end is all those things you wish you had known before. And one of those is the resources that we have to pull folks like you in on sticky problems. Okay, I'm going to start just kind of with my general view of government. As Sue said, I've been a mayor for 7 years. I'm just entering my last year as governor. I tell folks frequently that being in your last year of governor is a little like being the body in an open casket at the receiving of friends. Because people walk by and say, well, doesn't he look natural? No, I'm still here. And, kind of pushing up on the casket lid. Because you realize right. I mean, there's other people running for your job now. The airwaves are already full in Tennessee of people who would like to do what I'm doing next. But you also realize this is such a rare opportunity to make change. And I believed that, who's in office matters before I was the mayor and before I was a governor, and now I believe that times 10. It makes a huge difference who we elect and what their issues, what their approach to it is. My thought on government is this. Government exists to buy things that we can't buy for ourselves. You cannot buy your own defense program. You cannot buy your own interstate network. Most people can't buy their own schools. Some can. Most people can't buy their own mental health treatment, and I can keep going. So if that's true, then that's why we exist. And I had dinner last night with the Canadian ambassador to the U.S., and he literally stole the line that is the one I quote the most, that our job is to provide the very best service at the very lowest cost. That's what we're here for. But in doing that, you have to remember this. We're a monopoly, right? If you want a driver's license, you're getting it from us. If you want to drive down I-40 in Tennessee, that's our road, and we're the ones in charge of maintaining that. And I can keep going. So as a monopoly, we have a different responsibility, and our responsibility is to provide the very best service we can. So that we were talking before this, that one of the primary challenges is who's going to do that for you? What's the workforce going to look like? And I'm going to answer one of the questions that Sue might have asked me when we got through, but so she started by saying, what are you worried about will go away when you leave? Because we're at that point, and I can give you a long list of things, but she said her question was even better. What are you worried about that no one will see or no one pays attention to that will go away? And I think it's all about the quality of the workforce in state government. Again, remember, we're a monopoly. You want a driver's license, you're getting it from us. So it really matters how hard we work at giving you great service when you come to get your driver's license or you enter as a kindergarten student or whatever it is. If you think about that, if it's all about who's going to give great service inside a monopoly, what's the government form of employee compensation look like? We're going to pay you mediocre, right, at best. We're going to hire and promote whoever's been in line the longest, okay? Your pay raises are going to be just the same as everyone else's, but you got great long-term benefits. Okay, if I said design an effective customer service organization, you would not design that one. And so one of the things we did was we blew up the system. So we drastically reformed how we do civil service. I always have wondered, well, the problem is that Republicans don't sometimes care enough about government service. I'm a Republican, by the way. She left that out. And we have a reputation for not caring. It's like, well, let's shrink government, cut taxes, and then we can go tell everybody that we shrunk government and cut taxes. Democrats, on the other hand, I think have always been unwilling to address the system of how government employment works. So we need civil service. That's a basic right. And so they fought real hard to do that. And when we put in a performance pay system, we got a lot of pushback from the other side of the aisle about that. I would argue that all of us should say, we have this sacred obligation because we're a monopoly to provide great service. And so we should try to bring in a workforce that can provide that, because that's what's going to distinguish us. Second thing I'll say, and interesting, and I won't call him out, but the person who was the deputy governor for my predecessor is in the room. I just saw him back there. And my predecessor told me something as I was going into office. We actually sat, between the election and me being sworn in. He was a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And kind of asked, I said, what advice do you have? He had two great pieces of advice for me. One was, the governor should only do what only the governor can do, because you're going to get a zillion requests and people pulling and pushing on do this, do that. You think that you've been busy, but you have no idea until you understand the opportunities that you're going to have in front of you. So the governor should only do what only the governor can do. And the second thing he said was, everybody will say, we want you to run government like a business until you do. And then they're going to say, well, not like that. But that's our job. I love that one of Pew's missions is to provide database information that governments can make different decisions on, because we face a myriad of issues that aren't simple. One of my most fervent hopes is that we can keep doing that in states, that we can keep having decisions that are data-based instead of what is, I guess, transpired in the neighborhood here. Tennessee, we've really focused on three things. We focused on education. We don't have a great education track record in Tennessee, but we've made some really difficult changes. Again, started by my Democrat predecessor, we came in and continued those, all around the idea of raising standards, raising what we expect of students. Number two, more accountability in the sense of we want to make certain we have a year-end assessment that adequately measures what we're teaching. And then the third part of that would be having the teacher's evaluation be tied to the student's outcomes. Now, if you're not familiar with the education world, you might think, well, what's radical about that? The teacher's evaluation tied to student outcomes. But it is an incredibly radical idea. Going back, when President Obama was elected, think about that. This is a Democrat-elected president. One of the strongest voter bases for any Democrat is the teachers groups, and that's what the teachers union, teacher association, doesn't want to happen. They don't want the teachers' evaluations tied to student outcome and student testing. A Democrat president come in and put in place a system called Race to the Top that actually encouraged, incentivized states to do just that. Okay, so my predecessor took them up on that. Tennessee made great strides in increasing our standards, putting a year assessment, teachers' evaluations tied. We continued those, fought back when some of the pushback came, and because of that, for the last 4 years, Tennessee's been the fastest improving state in the country in education results. Now, thank you. The Senate could say we had a long way to go. So, when you're in the bottom, when you're in the 40s somewhere, 50 states, getting to the about the midpoint is not that great, but we had been in the 40s for a long time, and some very specific steps happened there. So we're focusing on that really for a couple of reasons. There's a huge workforce issue in our country today. Okay, there just is. Believe me, I used to spend all my time recruiting companies trying to tell them, well, here's what we'll do for you in terms of incentive package or this great piece of ground. Now every bit of it is about, do you have the workforce that we need? And the workforce, more often than not, the drive to 55 that Sue referred to is have 55% of our population have a degree or a certificate, a technical school certificate counts, by the year 2025. We started it 4 years ago. We're on pace to actually beat that and be there by 2023. But one of the reasons that K-12 education matters so much is in this world, a lot more folks need post-secondary education. They just do that, and I hear all the arguments. Not everybody does, and not everybody does, but a lot more do than used to. But it doesn't do us any good to offer free community college if when you get there you're not prepared. And 6 years ago, 70% of the students that graduated from our K-12 schools and got to community college needed remedial work when they got there. If you need remedial work when you get to community college, there's about a 20% chance you'll actually complete and finish. So a lot of work on that, and it's for the reasons we talked about. The second was all around the area of job recruitment. We came in, coming out of the Great Recession of 08, 09, unemployment's at 10.5%. When you're running for governor, it didn't take a genius to feel like, well, talking about jobs will be a good thing. So we benefited from the economy coming back, but even a little more. So Tennessee's unemployment's been about a point below the national average for the last year, where historically we've been at or above the national average. So we've made some real progress there by doing one thing. And this is what I think people say, what have you all done? I said, it's this. We recognize that in Tennessee that jobs get created when people put capital at risk. That's the only way jobs get created. Fred Smith, who started this little Tennessee company called FedEx, has this incredible chart, but it shows employment and capital investment from business, and they track. It's two parallel lines, up or down. And we get that, and so we treat companies like that. We realize jobs are going to create when you put capital at risk. And the third thing we've done is try to manage our budget in a way that we make great use of taxpayer dollars. So I talked about employees before. The average state employee in Tennessee makes $10,000 more than they did when we came in 7 years ago. Now we have fewer of them. We have 7 or 8% fewer employees, but we really are wanting to invest in the right places in the right ways. We've been fortunate in Tennessee that we have the lowest debt per capita in the country. We have one of the lowest total tax burdens in the country. We've been able to triple the amount of money that's in our rainy day fund. And we've been very conscientious of how we steward those resources. I personally think, and this is another conversation, that states that do that are in for a bigger competitive advantage even than normal. The tax reform plan that passed, as you remember, limits your state and local tax deductions to $10,000. If you're in a state where your total state tax burden is in the 11–12% range and you were making big dollars, you maybe thought, well, I get to deduct half of that, which you did under the old rules. You thought, well, maybe it's not that big a deal, but if there's a $10,000 limit on what you can deduct, well, now it's, maybe going to a state like Tennessee that has zero income tax might make a lot. I mean, 10 to 12% pay raise sounds pretty good. So I think you're going to see more state competitiveness based on what the total tax burden looks like for the individual than you might have under the old law. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I said I wanted to leave more time than not for questions, and I would love to talk about whatever you would like to talk about. If not, nobody has questions, I'll just keep going. Oh, way back in the back, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Then.
Morning, Governor. Thanks for being here. My name is Adam Levin. I'm in the State Fiscal Health Program. I actually have 2 questions, if
Sure.
that's okay. First is one of the themes that's come up in the country the last few years is about the urban-rural divide. Tennessee, I think, is a good example of that. Nashville is thriving.
Yeah.
Other parts of the state, I think, maybe not. So curious if you've seen effective policies for sort of leveraging the success of those areas in other parts of the state. My second, not totally unrelated question, I think, is about one you may be anticipating about the 800-pound elephant, which is Amazon. Nashville is on the short list. Potential upsides for that, I think, seem sort of clear. Curious if you see any sort of downsides and just sort of general thoughts on.
Yeah, that's great. Those are both great questions. So let's see. The first one was around. Say the first one again. I got to think about Amazon in my mind. What's right? It's like I might get asked to the prom, you know.
Sure. If there's sort of ways that you see effective policies for it.
Right. Okay. Good. So I'll do that. The rural-urban divide is real and it's a big issue, and some of that is just. It's an international trend of people moving to cities, and you see that everywhere. It's exacerbated by the fact that, again, in today's world, educational requirements are a lot deeper than they used to be. And so companies come to look to say, where can I find that workforce? And they know they can find a more educated workforce around urban areas. And so what was a natural, kind of a human tendency, I want to go to the bright lights of the big city, is accelerated by the education demands. So what have we done about it? And by the way, Tennessee has that issue because if you haven't been to Nashville recently, come. But I think you'll be surprised about, wow, look what all is happening there. I mean, it's an incredibly attractive city. I don't have to recruit companies to come to Nashville. It's almost, I mean, it's literally, you're taking the next company in line and working out details. But that's not true in our rural area. So what have we done about it? Well, 2 things. We've focused our economic development program around the rural areas, again, because Nashville will take care of itself. So I was really proud last year, 45% of our new jobs came in rural areas, but that was through, I mean, in some areas, getting a new call center might not be a big deal. I think, well, it's just sure people sit there and answer phones, you know, for as a third party for someone. But in our our county with the least or the biggest employment issue is a county called Hancock County up in upper Northeast. Still has large unemployment. Getting a 300-person call center for them was, I mean, it's like getting Amazon would be for Nashville. So we've worked really hard to do that. The second thing is, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but it does come back to education. One of our small rural towns in northwest Tennessee, I'd been governor for about 2 years, and the city fathers and mothers asked me if I'd come visit with them about economic development, why I wasn't helping them get more jobs. They were pretty certain that I had a bias against them because we hadn't brought some big company to them. And so we walked through how the process works. Normally it's the company deciding where they go, not the state. And they sort of believe me. And then I always, whenever I go to a place, I always visit a school. And so I left them and went to the school. And I'm meeting with a group of teachers, and I'm with a group of kindergarten teachers, and pardon my crassness early in the morning, but I'm quoting her. And she said, well, Governor, your problem is you expect too much out of us. I'm a kindergarten teacher, and my job is to wipe noses and wipe bottoms. And I remember thinking, no, that's not your job. Other kindergartens are learning to read. And if yours aren't, then we're going to have an issue, and that your child is not going to be prepared for anything post-secondary, and those jobs are not going to come. So part of it has been, people think of some of our biggest challenges as being in our urban core, but if I could take you to our, most poverty, challenged urban areas, and then take you to our most rural areas, and it would look remarkably similar. The skin color might be different, the housing might look different, but the challenges are very similar. So the rural-urban deal is one that every governor is struggling with. Amazon's an interesting one. It's, I don't know where they're going to go, okay? And I think we hope they choose Nashville. I mean, but I say that for this reason. They're talking about 50,000 employees, okay? Nashville is a booming city. Again, if you came down there, that you'd be impressed with downtown. But in our downtown core right now, and Amazon wants to go somewhere where they have public transportation and everything else, we've got about 75,000 people working. So you're going to go add 50 to 75. That's take the bigger metropolitan area. Obviously, you got way more than that. But in the downtown area, that would be a jolt to the system. So you have to be ready to handle that from an infrastructure piece and everything else. Maybe not if they end up going to one of the New York areas or areas around New York, or maybe not if they go around here. But even in those areas, Amazon will change the future of that city. I think there's a decent chance, by my personal opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't come somewhere in this greater DC area for lots of reasons. But even DC, as big and as much as it has going on, will be dramatically changed if Amazon locates here. My sense is one of the main reasons they're leaving Seattle is they literally, all the tech talent that they can get to come to Seattle, they've already gotten to come to Seattle. And so I think they're thinking, where's another pond we can go fish in for these incredible needs that we have? And if you've watched Bezos and what they try to do, is definitely, we're going to go build scale. And we're going to build scale and not worry about profit until we have the scale to dominate that next industry out.
Good morning, Governor Haslam. My name is Ann Mosley with the Aspen Institute. And thank you so much for your leadership and your comments. We worked very closely with former Commissioner Hatter and now Commissioner Barnes, thinking about reimagining health and human services, which is sometimes overlooked when you're thinking about jobs and the economy. And I was kind of curious to hear your thoughts about sort of the future of putting children and families at the center and what you've learned around public-private partnerships where government can incentivize them in a way that it leads to both policy change but really kind of concrete culture change and how the health and human services has evolved. Yeah,
thanks. And so the two women that she referred to run our Department of Human Services that we run, everything from our TANF programs to SNAP programs to a lot of human service agencies, and it's incredibly difficult, by the way. It's one of the things that you don't know when you come into these jobs is how complex it is to lead some of these departments. And they both worked really hard to form some of those public-private partnerships. one of the things we've tried to do within that is to try to, and you talked about children specifically, we've tried to think about it. If you're a family that uses the state's services, you probably bump up into us in more than one place. And so one of the leadership things they've done is say, well, for this family, this child, what are all the different places from education to human services to children's services, et cetera, that you interact with us? And we're trying to simplify that so that that family might have a quarterback who works with them for state services across. You know, the public-private partnership in the human service area, we've had mixed success, just to be honest. One of the things is, and you know this, the federal government, when the services that we think about is, we're not only all those things I said when I described government before, we're also the service arm for the federal government. So most of what the federal government provides in services, they use states to do. And they have certain assumptions, and one of those, for instance, like in a summer feeding program is, we want you to, we're way more concerned with you making certain that kids get fed than we are with making certain that the exact number of milk cartons were allocated. Our auditors don't feel that same way at all. And so that challenge of working with private providers and them fulfilling their mission and yet doing it in a way that we feel like is accountable, we haven't always gotten exactly right. So that'd be one of the things I'd say. The second is I do think it is about simplifying it from the customer's viewpoint in terms of when I'm dealing with the state, who am I dealing with, and can I have one face to deal with instead of 6 or 7, which is a challenge. And the third thing I'd say is this. It's really important that frontline worker be somebody who is there for more than 6 months in a very difficult job. And so one of the things we've tried to do, we've done some things like we've increased that person's pay, number one, and number two, we've also done something that we call alternative workspaces. That worker who was having to drive into the Human Services office and then drive back, we said, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just leave from your office, go to where your client is, your home, go to where your client is and come back. A city like Nashville that's like here, driving around is an issue. We have a lot of people that go, well, you just made my life a lot simpler. I'm spending more time with my customers and I'm getting home quicker. So it's a lot of it's been about how do we keep that frontline worker staying there. Yes.
My name is Matt Vestal-Gambros. I write for State Line here. States across the country are attempting to solve, issues related to mass shootings. There are 2 bills in Tennessee right now. One would ban bump stocks. The other would limit the penalty for carrying a handgun without a permit.
Yeah.
What sort of bill would you like to see come to your desk or solution to this issue?
Yeah. So I think you have to be, Senator Corker, is one of our senators, said yesterday, said, I think what you'll see is a different environment for the conversation. The conversation is still a really hard one, right? The views are still very distinct. 2 or 3 things that I would say specifically, what would you like to do? I agree with that on bump stocks, number 1. Number 2, it's just crazy to me that you can't buy a beer at 19, but you can buy an AR-15. So something that would address that, and then this has to happen federally, but beginning to work on making the background check a lot better process. I just feel like, we're miles apart on the whole gun control debate, and so you're not going to have this sweeping change. But I think starting to do some things like that most people would say, okay, that's common sense. I can agree with that, is the right thing to do to show that, hey, we've got an issue in this country, and we can talk about all the different reasons, but you got to say we have an issue. So those are 3 things that I would do right away.
Good start. My name is Daniel Landsman. I'm from Families Against Mandatory Minimums. First off, as a Tennessean, thank you for coming up here and talking with us today. My question is, you've worked really hard, along with Pew, to reform the juvenile justice system in Tennessee. And I was wondering what you thought the future of adult criminal justice reform is in Tennessee. Our neighbor up north in Kentucky, Governor Bevins, has done a lot of good work on that. I was wondering what you thought.
And Georgia has to our other neighbor.
Yeah.
Georgia's
With
done
Governor Deal.
Governor Deal's done a nice job down there too. So, you know, when you leave, there's always, you always have some pieces that you wish you could attack more fully. I would like for us to have gotten into criminal justice reform in a deeper way. And in terms of looking at but I think doing that means looking at the whole code. And we looked at doing a kind of partial piece of that, but we just literally ran out of capacity this year. I'm hoping whoever comes after me does that. There is a great willingness, I think, for folks to do that. Like everything else, when you want to put some, I think you said you're with Families Against Mandatory Minimums. When you start to do things that take discretion away from someone else, in this case, judges, we're doing a deal with opioids where we're proposing to take some discretion away from physicians' prescribing practices. When you start to do that, then you run into strong pushback, and it's the ability to get past that tough issue. So I would love to tell you that we were in the middle of my last year that was one of our major legislative proposals, but like I said, we literally just ran out of bandwidth. I'm hoping the next people will do it, because we have one of the things that folks like Pew do is you can help us say, well, catch us up. Criminal justice reform, catch us up. Evaluate here's what Georgia did, here's what Kentucky did. There's some western states that have done things. Show us the different alternatives that we can take. And then, like I said, that's like starting on second base if you're the governor. Yes.
Thanks for being here with us, Governor. I appreciate it. The Outdoor Industry Association estimates that outdoor spending on public lands in Tennessee supports 200,000 jobs and $6 billion in wages and salaries.
Right.
With that stat in mind, Senators Alexander and Corker, along with Congressman Rowe, have introduced a wilderness bill for the Cherokee National Forest. But I'm curious what can be done at the state level to support outdoor recreation on public lands.
So sometimes it comes down to very specific things. So there's a whitewater river called the Ocoee in East Tennessee. It's where, those of you who were around when we had the Olympics in Atlanta, it's where they did all the whitewater events. Interestingly, what had happened is it's controlled by TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. They use that for power generation. So to open it up for outdoor activity, TVA had to shut off their power generation. And so back 20 years ago, the state and TVA made a deal. It ran out this year, and the question is that a good use of taxpayer dollars for us to negotiate a deal with TVA for certain days a week to quit generating power, let the water flow. We can attract people who are who would come there, whether they're kayaking or rafting or whatever it is. So we made that decision. We actually kind of bought 10 years of water use from TVA to do that because we think it matters so much to do that. This is again Bill's theory, so 50-50 chance it's right, but a lot of you fit this generation about millennials and different lifestyle habits, but one of my fairly strong theories is that the millennial generation is not going to buy nearly as much stuff, but they're going to buy a lot more experiences. And I think I have kids that age, etc. I just think it's like, well, I don't really care if I have 3 of those coats, but I do want to make certain I go to these places and do these things. And so I think one of the ways states will win is by attracting people to come see them. Again, for us, it makes sense. We don't have an income tax. We're driven by sales tax. If you come visit us, and hope you do, and every time you buy something, we get 7% of that. It's a pretty good way to make things work. So we have a big outdoor presence in Tennessee. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park is the most visited national park in the country. We try to play off of that outdoor heritage. Yes, I'm gonna go over here.
We have one here and one. Good morning, Governor. I had the awesome opportunity to be in Tennessee last week, so I have a couple of questions based on my visit.
Okay.
And this is my first 2 questions are really in the area of juvenile justice. because there have been two headlines that have come out of Tennessee in the last year or so around juvenile justice. And the first one that I want to ask about, because I actually had the opportunity to sit in the courtroom and hear the case play out, which was Terriana Wilton, I believe is her name. And it's a case of a 16-year-old girl who's being held in solitary confinement. And the issue was around housing. And it's because she's in an adult prison. And the questions came up around, you know, is the facility that she's in, are they able to comply with the sight and sound regulations, which under testimony, both adult correctional facilities said that they were not able to be in 100% compliance. The services that she's able to get are not equitable to what she would be able to get if she was properly housed in a different facility. But then the judge, when he made the final ruling to send her back to solitary confinement, said that he does not have the ability to send her to a juvenile facility. And so the question that I have around juvenile justice is, I know that one of the thrust of your policies has to do with rehabilitation, and it seems like there's a policy issue there that's preventing that. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So those of us who are in government, I know there's some members of the media here, we don't always think that the media is the most helpful folks in the world, but there are a lot of times when an issue comes up that you don't know about. One of those is this, the situation, I think I can roughly describe, well, I don't know the specific case, but I just found out our local, for better or worse, all four of the five leading newspapers in our state are all owned by the same chain. But they ran a feature basically on this issue. So if a local jail, if a juvenile's in a local jail and the local jail says we can't take care of that person here, then it goes to a judge and the judge says, all right, well, they need to go in state custody. But because they're a juvenile and they go into state custody, they can't be in the general population, so they end up in solitary with limited. So in everybody's mind goes, well, that doesn't make sense, and I agree. It's one of those things. Literally, I didn't know that's how it works. So we're trying to look to see what can we do in those juveniles who. I mean, nobody would say that's a good idea to have a juvenile end up in solitary confinement in an adult prison. The question is the system saying, well, tell us what you want us to do, because the judge said we have to do that. Our folks that run our prisons say that's all we have. I mean, we're not going to put them in the general population. That's all we have. And I think most of us would agree that's not an adequate answer. So I don't have our solution yet. I became aware of the problem in the last 3 to 4 weeks. We're going to see what we can do to address that, because there's got to be a better plan.
Thank you. And so the second question, under the same umbrella of juvenile justice, had to do with the other headline that came out about, oh my gosh, Centoya Brown. Same thing, juvenile, she went in as a juvenile, charged as an adult, basically has a lifetime sentence, and she was a victim of human sex trafficking. And so I know that there has been some push to ask for clemency because of the extenuating circumstances, and I know that, well, I just wanted to kind of hear your opinion and feedback, again, under the juvenile justice reform and the whole push towards rehabilitation.
Yeah, so I'll describe the situation there. A woman who was a girl at the time, caught in sex trafficking, ends up being convicted of murder with the person who she was taken by, and you know that's the basic circumstances. She was 15, 16 at the time, 15 or 16 at the time. I can't comment specifically because that appeal for clemency will end up on my desk. It's making its way there, so it's probably not appropriate for me to comment specifically. What we try to do in those cases is to literally really do our homework and dig down and find out what are the circumstances and what's happening there. Her case, because a lot of celebrities have taken it up, has become very public. But there are others like that. We had a man who I just, we gave a pardon to, he's actually out of jail, but he had been convicted of rape 40, 50 years ago. The DNA that we have now proved that, well, the DA said if I'd had this evidence, I would not have, if I'd been the DA, I would not have prosecuted him. And so we decided to exonerate him. So you just try to do your homework the best you can on each individual situation and make the very best call you can. And like I said, in her case, it's probably just not appropriate for me to comment more. Becky, yes?
Hi, Governor. I'm Steve Fair. Shifting subjects a little bit. What advice would you give your successor about managing the state's finances?
I would say this. We've actually, think about this. I came into office, I'm sworn in January of 11. The economy has basically been on a uptrend since then. Okay, it's been a gradual. I mean, the economy was weaker back then in 11, 12, 13, 14 than everybody thought it would be, but it was still on an upward trend, and it's pretty much stayed that way despite a few bumps. Our legislature does not have term limits, but by the time I leave, when the next governor comes in, only about 30 or less, probably by then about 30% of the legislature would have been there before I was there, served under my predecessor, Governor Bredesen. We've had that kind of turnover. The fear that I have, and that my predecessor needs to understand, is there will be some, I mean, I'm not certain when, but the economy, law of averages tell you we're going to have a downturn at some point in time. You're going to be working with a lot of people who have never been here during a hard downturn. We've had a hard year, but not where 3 years where revenues were flat to going down. Here's the way states basically work. In most years, you get about 2.5%, 3% revenue growth, okay? But that is all eaten up by Medicaid growth, just the natural cost of health care going up, education inflation, health insurance increases for your employees. That eats up, like in Tennessee, typically in most years, we have about $500 million of new revenue. In most years, Medicaid, what we call TennCare, would go up about 300, education would go up about 200, miscellaneous stuff, like I said, health insurance, et cetera, would go up another 100. We're done before we've given a pay raise, we've done one new program, et cetera. So you've got to always be looking how you're going to shave off so that you can give pay raises and do the things you'd like to. So I would tell them to be prepared, because there will be a downturn, and you're going to be working with a lot of people who have never been here during a downturn. And in state governments, every governor brags, I've balanced 7 straight budgets. Well, it's the law. Okay, it's the law. And so you've got to balance that budget. You're going to be working with a lot of people. We have an overwhelmingly Republican legislature, and they really, really want to cut taxes, but they don't really want to cut expenses very bad, because there's some pain involved in whoever it is. And so it's that my successor will have that tough, reckoning moment when we're going to say, we can't do that, of something they really want to do. Yes?
Thanks for taking our questions. Neil Ridley at Georgetown University. I'm not going to ask about education. I just want to build on the previous question. How would you assess the state of unemployment insurance in your state and the other states, given, just to build on the previous question, I mean, a recession is inevitable. We never think about it when things are booming, but at some point we're going to have a recession. When you look at Tennessee and the other states, how do you think, are we ready? Are the states ready? As you know, I think it was before you were in office, a lot of the states were in a position of having to borrow from the federal government to get through the recession. And do you think, and are we in a better position for the next downturn, whenever that might happen?
Yeah, great question. And in a famous, as an academic, you can appreciate the answer is it depends. Because it depends on how deep and long it is. I mean, if it's a downturn, in Tennessee we're actually well positioned, again, because we've had so many good years in a row, and we've built up our funds to be in a good way. If it's a longer one, we'll be back to where we were in 08, 09, where we have in other states have a problem. I think one of the things that's part of your question is, the economy is changing so fast. And I'll give you one example. In Tennessee, we make a lot of cars. We have Nissan, Volkswagen, General Motors all have big plants. The largest, well, governor's brag, okay? The largest car plant in the history of all of the Americas It's not in Michigan, it's in Tennessee. Nissan makes 800,000 vehicles a year in a town called Smyrna, just south of Nashville. Okay, but those combustion engines that propel most of our vehicles are at some point in time going to give way to battery-propelled vehicles. Good thing for the environment, good for a lot of things, but it takes a lot fewer people to build a battery than it does a combustion engine. So you see those kind of changes. It just takes a lot fewer people to do the same thing in everything than it used to. How the economy absorbs all that, so far we've done okay, but in the next downturn where people are going to say, well, we're going to try to save even more on the labor portion, what happens there? I think that's a big concern. And it is in Tennessee, it is everywhere. We've worked really hard to build up a big manufacturing base, which is, I think, is the best kind of employment to have because of the middle class jobs it provides. But when the economy slows down, we will feel it. I think I got time for one or two more.
Let's do one last.
I'm going to go, I'll do two real quick, and then I think it's going to be good. I'll answer fast.
Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Lajune Montgomery-Tabor. I'm from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I just wanted to follow on your last thought. So as you were just saying, when the economy goes down, you are going to have this labor issue. And
right.
You spoke earlier about the issue of workforce being
right.
something that's very important now and that actually has the business attention. What would you tell your successor, knowing everything you know now and all the learnings you've had, about how to pay attention to education?
I will say this, and you start, as you get in your last year, you start to, one of the hard things is you want to, the gains you've made, you want to make certain stay in place, but you don't want to make it look like, well, we've done so great, keep doing everything the way we have, because nobody wants to, thank you very much, your time's over, see ya. But I do want to tell folks that the gains we made, particularly in education, we didn't just get lucky. I tell folks that all the time. Again, my predecessor set certain policies in place. We have followed up and we've held the door. And I just think it's critical to know that some hard decisions that some people don't like, in particular, I'd say that tying teacher evaluations to student assessments that a lot of people don't like, that's been critical for our success, and we've also invested there. I'll just make one last comment, and this is for the country, okay? And sorry, this will be the last question I take. We've been through an extraordinary period in our country. Think back now to 17 years ago. You have a Republican president, George W. Bush, who starts a thing called No Child Left Behind. Ends up becoming very controversial, but the thought was fairly radical. It says, no matter where you live, we think you should have the same opportunity for educational success as anyone else. And we're not going to say, I'm sorry, those kids can't learn, or we don't get any college students out of this zip code. We're not going to say that. So radical idea for a Republican president. Followed up by Barack Obama, like I said, a Democrat who went against the teachers union and said, we're going to do these things. And again, had an education secretary, Arne Duncan, who was very active and aggressive, et cetera. The pushback to all that was a lot of folks, including states like ours, that said, way too much federal intervention, way too much, you tell us what to do. That we passed ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, dramatic change in the balance of power. When Betsy DeVos was made Secretary of Education, all this discussion about, is she the right person? With all respect to Betsy, the Secretary of Education doesn't make nearly as much difference as they did before. It's not, I'm not saying that about Betsy DeVos, that's just in general, because a lot more of the power has been devolved to state and local governments. So the net result of all that is school boards have become way, way more important in this world than they were 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. School boards are incredibly important, and state legislatures and what decisions they make are way more important than what comes out of the Department of Education in Washington. That's the law now. And so folks need to realize that, and don't, the last thing I'll say is we made a lot of our gains in Tennessee by us saying, well, the federal government's making us do that. Okay, I'm a Republican, I'm not supposed to like that, but a lot of the medicine that they told us to take was really good for us. You don't have that anymore, and that will change the landscape. So I'm supposed to be at the Pentagon in 25 minutes, and those guys don't take late very well. So, thanks.